Some people matter. Others just fill space, right, Mama? Those were my son Marcus's words. My son raised his glass before everyone, smiled broadly, and let those words drop as though they were part of his birthday toast, as if I weren't sitting right there at the far end of that long dining table, watching every single person laugh. He had just turned 42. The house overflowed with guests. Smooth jazz drifted through the rooms, red wine gleamed in crystal glasses, plates bore the remnants of an expensive meal, and warm amber lighting cast everything in a golden, perfect glow. Marcus stood tall in that crisp white shirt, probably worth more than $200, his designer watch catching the light, and his wife Chloe beside him wearing that smile that had never once included me. I sat at the very end of the table, literally where they used to stack empty serving platters and crumpled napkins. No one had asked where I wanted to sit. No one said a word when I settled there, because I already understood it was my designated place. Then my son cleared his throat. Everyone fell silent. He lifted his glass higher and repeated himself, this time looking directly at me. Because let's be honest, some people matter. Others just fill space. The laughter that followed wasn't awkward or uncertain. It was genuine, shared, as if everyone had been waiting for exactly that moment. As if they all knew precisely whom he meant. Chloe covered her mouth, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. The cousins nodded knowingly. Aunt Vivian lowered her gaze but smiled nonetheless. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't even look away. I simply remained there, wine glass in hand, feeling the silence in my own throat weigh heavier than any response I could possibly deliver. Heat rose up my neck, not from shame, but from rage. A cold, controlled rage. The kind that burns from within but doesn't make you tremble. The kind that teaches you to wait for exactly the right moment. Marcus continued speaking. You have to be real, right? There are people who add value to the equation, and then there are people who, well, you know. He shrugged casually. Everyone laughed again. Someone called out, cheers. Glasses clinked together. I remained motionless, staring at him, remembering. I remembered when he was 5 years old, crying in the middle of the night with a burning fever. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, placing cold compresses on his forehead, singing softly until he calmed. We had no money for a doctor. We barely had enough to eat. But I was there. I remembered when he was 12 and got jumped at school. He came home with a black eye and his shirt torn, crying from humiliation and anger. I held him close. I told him he was strong, that he would rise above it, that other people's opinions didn't matter, and that I would always have his back. I remembered when he was 17 and wanted to attend college. We had no money. I worked double shifts for 2 solid years to pay for his classes. I sold the jewelry my mother had left me. I sold furniture. I sold everything of value I owned, everything except my dignity. That I saved until today. And now he stood there in his $200 shirt, his watch worth more than 6 months' rent, in his enormous house that I'd helped him buy with the first $1,000 I'd saved cleaning other people's homes, telling me in front of everyone that I simply filled space. The laughter continued around me. Someone told a joke. Someone else requested more wine. The music volume increased slightly, and I remained there at the end of the table, invisible yet present, silent yet fully awake. Then I took a deep breath. I placed my glass carefully on the table. I stood slowly, without making a sound, but everyone noticed immediately. The laughter faded. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Marcus looked at me, still smiling, but now with a flicker of surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to do anything at all. I spoke calmly, without shouting, without my voice shaking. It's good that you mentioned that, Marcus, because you're absolutely right. Some people matter, and others just fill space. He looked confused. Everyone stared at me. No one moved. I continued. It's fortunate, then, that I've just purchased my own house, 2,000 miles from here. I've signed the papers, I've paid in full, and I already have the keys. The silence transformed. It was no longer the silence of shared laughter. It was the silence of shock, confusion, and fear. Marcus opened his mouth, but nothing emerged. Chloe's smile vanished. The cousins exchanged bewildered glances. Aunt Vivian looked up sharply. "Don't worry, Marcus," I said evenly. "You'll never have to put up with me filling space in your life again. I'm leaving, and this time it's permanent." I grabbed my purse, turned, and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one spoke. I heard only the sound of my own footsteps on the hardwood floor, and then the sound of the door closing behind me. Outside, the air was cold, but I felt nothing. Just relief, just clarity, just the certainty that I had finally done what I should have done years ago. I got into the car, started the engine, and as I drove down those familiar streets where I'd raised the boy who now despised me, I realized something profound. I hadn't just filled space. I had built the very space where he now lived. And it was time to build my own. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes. The streets lay empty. It was late. Street lamps illuminated the wet pavement, still slick from recent rain. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear but from release, like finally letting go of something you've carried so long you've forgotten what it feels like to live without the weight. I stopped in front of a park. The same park where I used to take Marcus as a child. Where I taught him to ride his bike. Where he fell and scraped his knees, and I wiped away his tears, telling him the pain would pass but that the courage to try again was what truly mattered. I turned off the engine and sat in silence, watching an empty swing sway gently in the wind. And then I cried. Not from sadness, but from rage. From helplessness. From years accumulated of making myself small so others could feel big. From years of saying yes when I wanted to say no. From years of swallowing my words to avoid disrupting the peace of a family that never gave me any peace. I cried all the tears I hadn't shed at that table. All the tears I hadn't shed when they seated me at the end like an unwelcome guest in my own son's life. All the tears I hadn't shed when I heard that shared laughter, the laughter that erased me. But after the crying came something else. Clarity. The same clarity I'd experienced 3 months ago when I made the most important decision of my life. The decision no one knew about. The decision I had just revealed at that table, changing everything in a single moment. Because I hadn't spoken on impulse. I hadn't said those words because I was hurt and wanted to wound him back. I said them because they were true. 3 months earlier, I had quietly begun planning my exit, without telling anyone, without asking permission. 3 months ago, I received a phone call. It was Isla, my distant cousin who lives in a small coastal town in South Carolina, 2,000 miles from the city that no longer felt like mine. She told me a neighbor was selling her house, a modest 2-bedroom home with a front yard and a porch where you could watch the sunset. She sent me photographs. I stared at those photographs for hours. The house wasn't luxurious. It didn't have marble floors or floor-to-ceiling windows like Marcus's house. But it had something I hadn't possessed in years. Peace, silence, space that was mine and no one else's. I asked her the price. She said the owner was asking $60,000. I had $42,000 saved. I'd been saving for years, setting aside every bill I could, every tip, every extra dollar I earned selling sweet potato pies on weekends, doing clothing alterations for neighbors, jobs Marcus never knew about because he never asked what I did with my time. I told Isla I needed to think about it, but truthfully, I didn't need to. I had already decided. I just needed to raise the remaining money. I sold the gold ring my mother gave me before she died. I sold the antique china I'd inherited from my grandmother. I sold old furniture I had stored in the back room of Marcus's house, the room where I slept, which was more storage unit than bedroom. No one asked. No one noticed because to them I was invisible. And for the first time in my life, that invisibility worked in my favor. Within 2 months, I raised the full $60,000. I called Isla and told her I wanted the house. She spoke with the owner. We signed papers. I handled everything online, in silence, late at night when everyone slept, sitting at the kitchen table with the light off so no one would ask what I was doing. A week ago, I received the keys in the mail. I hid them in my purse. I touched them every day just to remind myself they were real, that it wasn't a dream, that I truly had a place to go. And today, when Marcus said what he said, when he humiliated me before everyone, when he confirmed what I already knew, that to him I wasn't his mother but a problem, a burden, something that filled space, I knew the time had come to speak. Not out of revenge, but out of truth. I dried my tears and started the car again. I wasn't returning to that house. Not tonight. Perhaps never again. I drove to a small hotel downtown, a simple, clean place where no one knew me. I paid for one night, went up to my room, sat on the bed, and checked my phone. I had 12 missed calls. All from Marcus. 3 messages from Chloe. 1 from Aunt Vivian. None of them said sorry. They all said variations of "we need to talk," or "this is a misunderstanding," or "you can't just leave like that." I turned off the phone, lay down, and for the first time in years, I slept without feeling I owed anyone anything. The next morning, I woke early. Sunlight streamed through the window. I showered, dressed, and went downstairs for breakfast. The coffee was hot, the bread was fresh, and I was alone. But I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. I turned on my phone. More calls. More messages. This time, even the cousins had written. Everyone wanted to know if it was true, if I was really leaving, if I had actually bought a house, if I was genuinely going to abandon them. I replied to only one message, Isla's. I told her, "I'll be there in 3 days. Thank you for everything." Then I deleted the rest. I didn't block anyone. I simply didn't respond, because I didn't owe them explanations. I didn't owe them my time. I didn't owe them anything. I spent that day organizing my belongings. I didn't have much. My entire life fit into 4 boxes: clothes, a few books, old photographs I didn't look at anymore but couldn't discard, a woven blanket I'd made years ago, and my grandmother's cross. That was all. I didn't have furniture because the furniture belonged to Marcus. I didn't have dishes because the dishes came from his house. I had nothing that was truly mine except those 4 boxes and the $60,000 I'd used to purchase my freedom. I hired a small moving company. I told them to come the following day. I gave them the hotel address and explained it was only 4 boxes. The man looked at me strangely but didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Understood, ma'am. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." That night, I slept in the hotel again. I turned off the phone again. I felt that strange peace again. The peace that hurts a little because you're leaving an entire life behind, but which also brings relief because you know that life was no longer yours. I thought about Marcus, the child he was, the man he became, and I wondered at what point I lost one and gained the other. At what point love transformed into dependence. At what point my sacrifice became my prison. I didn't find answers. I found only more questions. But it didn't matter anymore, because I had already made my decision. And this time, no one was going to stop me. The next morning, as the sun was just rising, I woke with a knot in my stomach. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, the feeling of closing a door that had been open for 67 years. The door to a life I'd built with my hands, my back, and my silence. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and looked out the window. The city was waking. People walked to their jobs. Cars passed. Normal life continued, indifferent to what was happening inside me. I thought about that table, the table where they'd seated me at the end. I thought about the laughter, about Marcus's eyes when he spoke those words. There had been no doubt in his gaze, no guilt, only certainty. The certainty of someone who knows they can say whatever they want because the other person won't do anything about it. But he was wrong. I got up and dressed slowly. Every movement was deliberate. Every garment I put on was a decision. It wasn't just clothing. It was armor. It was preparation for what was coming. I went down to the hotel restaurant. I ordered black coffee and 2 slices of toast. The waitress was young, maybe 20, with her hair in a ponytail and a tired smile. She asked if I was visiting the city. I told her no, that I was leaving forever. She smiled more widely and said, "How brave." I didn't know if she meant it or was simply being polite, but I kept those words. How brave? Was it brave, or was it cowardly? Was it brave to leave, or would it have been braver to stay and fight? I didn't know. I only knew I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. That every day I spent there made me smaller. That if I stayed one more year, I would disappear completely. I finished my breakfast and returned to my room. At exactly 8 o'clock, the moving truck arrived. 2 young, polite men loaded my 4 boxes as if they were made of crystal, even though they were just old cardboard containing things worthless to anyone but me. I gave them the address of my new house, 2,000 miles away. They told me it would take 4 days to arrive. I paid them half up front, $1,200. It hurt to spend that money, but it was necessary. I couldn't carry the boxes with me on the bus. Yes, a bus. Because I didn't have a car. The car I'd driven that night belonged to Marcus. Everything belonged to Marcus. The house, the furniture, the car. Even the plate I ate from was his. I had nothing. And yet I now had everything. I had a house that was mine. I had keys that only I could use. I had a future no one else was going to control. I went to the bus terminal. I bought a ticket for the next day, $530. A 2-day journey with 1 stop in the middle. I didn't care. I needed that time. I needed those hours of silence, of movement, of distance between who I was and who I was going to become. I returned to the hotel. I spent the rest of the day alone in my room. I stared at the ceiling. I counted the cracks in the paint. I listened to the sounds of the city through the window. Someone shouting, a car horn, distant laughter. Life. Life that wasn't mine, but that was there, reminding me the world kept spinning. I turned on my phone. More messages. More calls. This time there was one from Marcus that said, "Mom, we need to talk. This is ridiculous. You can't just leave like this. Come home. We'll fix this." Fix this. As if what happened were a technical problem. As if his words hadn't been real. As if I hadn't been sitting there at the end of the table watching everyone laugh at me. I didn't answer. I simply put the phone away. I lay down, closed my eyes, and returned to that moment. I went back to that table. I heard his voice again. Some people matter. Others just fill space. I saw everyone's faces again. Chloe with that hidden smile. The cousins nodding. Aunt Vivian, who didn't have the courage to defend me. And I wondered how many times it had happened before. How many times they had talked about me when I wasn't there. How many times they'd said I was a burden, that I was the problem, that it would be better if I weren't around. Probably many times. Probably for years. But that night was different. That night they said it to my face. And that night I answered. I got out of bed, went to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a 67-year-old woman. Wrinkles around her eyes. Gray hair. Rough hands from so much work. Slumped shoulders from carrying so many burdens. But I also saw something else. I saw strength. I saw resolve. I saw someone who was still alive, who could still choose, who still had a voice, even if no one had listened to it for years. I went back to bed, grabbed my phone, and wrote a single message. Not for Marcus, but for myself. Just 3 words. Almost there now. I saved it in my notes. I didn't send it to anyone. It was simply a reminder, an anchor, a promise. I couldn't sleep well that night. I woke several times. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that table. I saw that raised glass. I saw that smile. I heard those laughs. But I also saw something else. I saw my new house. I saw the porch Isla had shown me in the photographs. I saw the small yard. I saw a place where no one was going to tell me I filled space, because that space was going to be mine. At 5 in the morning, I was already awake. I showered, dressed, went down to the front desk, and paid the bill, $240 for 3 nights. I left the hotel with my bag slung over my shoulder and a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't joy. It was something in between, the weight of letting go. I walked to the bus terminal. The streets were still dark. There were a few vendors opening their stalls, a woman selling sweet rolls, a man arranging fruit. It smelled like fresh coffee and warm bread. Morning. I reached the terminal, sat on a metal bench, and waited. I watched people pass, families traveling together, couples embracing, children running. And me, alone. But I didn't feel lonely. I felt in transition, like when you're between 2 places and don't yet belong to either, but you know you'll arrive soon. The bus arrived at 7 o'clock. I boarded, found my window seat in row 12, placed my purse on my lap, settled in, and looked out the window. The bus pulled away. And as we left the city, as the streets I knew became smaller, more distant, more blurred, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt hope. Small, fragile, but real. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I knew I was going to be. Very soon. The bus sped down the highway, and I stared out the window without really seeing anything. I simply thought. I thought about how I had arrived here. How a woman who once had her own dreams ended up sitting at the end of a table as the subject of her own son's joke. I closed my eyes and traveled back much further. Marcus was born when I was 25. His father left when Marcus was 6 months old. There was no goodbye, no explanation. One morning I simply woke up and he was gone. He'd left a note on the kitchen table that read, "I can't handle this. Sorry." That was it. 27 words to end a life that was just beginning. I was left alone with a baby who cried every night. No money. No family nearby. Nothing but my hands and the need to survive. I worked every job I could find. I cleaned houses. I washed other people's clothes. I babysat other women's children while mine slept in a cardboard box I'd converted into a crib because I didn't have money to buy a real one. Marcus grew up seeing that. He grew up seeing his mother leave before dawn and return after dark. He grew up eating whatever I could buy with the coins I collected at the end of each week. He grew up wearing clothes other mothers had discarded, which I repaired with my hands to make them look new. But he never lacked love. He never lacked attention. Every night, no matter how exhausted I was, I sat with him. I read him stories. I sang him songs. I told him he was smart, he was strong, he was going to be someone important in life. And he was. He graduated high school with good grades. He got into college thanks to the savings I'd accumulated over years. He studied business administration. He got a job at a large company. He started earning money, good money, more money than I'd seen in my entire life. At first, everything was fine. He invited me out to eat. He asked how I was. He bought me small things, nothing luxurious, but gifts that meant he was thinking of me. I was proud. I thought all the sacrifice had been worthwhile, that my son had become a good man. But then he met Chloe Miller, a woman from a wealthy family, college educated, with that air of superiority noticeable from the first moment. The first time I met her, she extended her hand to greet me, but she didn't look me in the eye. She looked at the old dress I was wearing. She looked at my rough hands. She looked at me the way you look at someone who isn't up to your standard. Marcus didn't notice. Or he didn't want to notice. He was in love. Or perhaps he was simply in love with the idea of belonging to a world that had always been denied to him. The world of people with money, with important last names, with big houses and new cars. They married 6 months later. The wedding was expensive. Very expensive. 500 guests. A huge ballroom. Imported flowers. French wine. A dress that cost more than $8,000. I helped pay, not because he asked directly, but because he dropped comments. "Mom, the wedding is so expensive. I don't know how we're going to cover everything." And I, as always, pulled out my savings. $3,000. All I had saved at the time. At the wedding, they seated me at a table in the back, near the kitchen, far from the main table where Marcus sat with Chloe and her parents. Someone told me it was because there wasn't enough space. I didn't say anything. I just smiled and ate in silence while I watched my son dance with his new wife, surrounded by people who had never cleaned a floor in their lives. After the wedding, things changed. Slowly. So slowly that I didn't realize it until it was too late. The calls became less frequent. The visits, too. When I went to their house, there was always a reason I couldn't stay long. "Mom, we have an important dinner." "Mom, today isn't a good day." "Mom, we're tired." Chloe stopped pretending she liked me. She started making small, sharp comments. "Eleanor, that blouse is really old now." "Eleanor, you should dye your gray hair." "Eleanor, don't you have anything else to do at your own place?" Always with a smile. Always with that tone that made her words sound like advice, but which were really blows. Marcus didn't stop her. Sometimes he even laughed, as if it were funny. As if I were the joke. The years passed. Marcus prospered. He opened his own business. He bought a bigger house. He changed cars twice. He traveled to Europe, to Asia, to places I'd only seen in old magazines. And I continued living in the same small apartment where I'd raised him, working, saving, hoping that one day my son would once again be the boy who hugged me and told me I was the best mom in the world. But that boy no longer existed. Or perhaps he never really existed. Perhaps he was just an illusion, a projection of what I wanted him to be. 2 years ago, the owner of the apartment where I lived told me he was selling the building. I had to leave. I panicked. I had nowhere to go. I didn't have enough money to rent another place. Prices had risen too much. I called Marcus. I explained the situation. There was silence on the other end. Then he said, "Okay, Mom, you can come live with us. But only temporarily, until you find something." I moved into their house, into the back room, the one they used as a storage unit. Chloe didn't say anything, but her face said everything. Every time she saw me, she frowned as if my presence contaminated her perfect home. Marcus told me not to worry, that it was temporary, that I would find something soon. But months passed, and there were never any conversations about finding me a place. There was only silence. And glances, and that constant feeling of being where I shouldn't be. I started making myself invisible. I got up early so as not to be in the way in the kitchen. I ate quickly. I locked myself in my room. I went out little. I spoke less. I became a ghost in my own son's house. And then came that night. That birthday night where everything exploded. Where Marcus said aloud what everyone had been thinking in silence, that I simply filled space. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been planning my exit for months. That every dollar I saved, every object I sold, every sacrifice I made was for this. For the moment when I could leave. For the moment when I could say, enough. And that moment came, and I seized it. I opened my eyes. The bus was still moving. Outside, the landscape had transformed. No more city, only open country, trees, mountains in the distance, open sky. I took a deep breath. I removed the keys from my purse and touched them. Cold. Real. Mine. I smiled, because this time the space I was going to occupy was going to be my own. And no one, absolutely no one, was going to tell me I didn't deserve to be there. Because now I knew the truth. I didn't fill space. I created space. And that space was sacred. The bus stopped at a rest area. It was noon. The sun blazed hot against the windows. People began getting off to stretch their legs, buy food, or use the restroom. I stayed seated a moment longer, looking out the window, thinking. I thought about the exact moment I decided to leave. It wasn't that birthday night. It was months earlier. An ordinary afternoon. Nothing special. No big fights or hurtful words. It was simply the accumulated weight of hundreds of small humiliations that finally broke me. I was in the kitchen washing dishes. Chloe came in with her cell phone, talking to someone. She didn't look at me. She never looked at me when she talked on the phone, as if I were part of the furniture. I heard what she was saying. Yes, it's complicated. No, it's not that she's a bad person. It's just, she's older. She needs things. Attention. Space. And we have our lives. Marcus works so much, and I do too. We can't be looking after her all the time. Sometimes I feel like, well, it is what it is. She talked about me as if I weren't there. As if I didn't have ears. As if I weren't a human being with feelings, but a problem that needed solving. I kept washing the dishes. I didn't say anything, but something inside me broke. Or perhaps it didn't break. Perhaps it woke up. That part of me that had been asleep for years. That part that once had dreams, plans, its own voice. That part I'd sacrificed for my son, thinking that one day he would thank me for it. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling of the back room, listening to the sounds of the house. Marcus and Chloe laughing in the living room. The television on. Their normal, happy lives. Without the problem. And I asked myself, when was the last time I was happy? When was the last time I did something for myself? When was the last time someone asked me what I wanted, what I needed, what I dreamed about? I couldn't find an answer, because so much time had passed that I no longer even remembered what it felt like to be the owner of my own life. The next morning, I started. Slowly. Without announcing anything. I opened a new bank account, one only I knew about. I started depositing every single penny I could save. I stopped buying unnecessary things for myself. I stopped spending money on gifts for Marcus and Chloe, which they never appreciated anyway. I saved everything. Every bill counted. Every coin was a step closer to my freedom. I started selling things. First the easiest ones. Old clothes I didn't wear anymore, books I'd read 1,000 times, small trinkets I'd kept out of nostalgia but which no longer meant anything. I sold them online, at second-hand markets, in neighborhood Facebook groups. No one asked. No one noticed. Then I sold more important things. My mother's ring. My grandmother's china. Old furniture I had stored. Every sale hurt because they were memories. They were pieces of my history. But at the same time, every sale brought me closer to my new life. And that hurt less than staying. Weeks passed. The money grew. $42,000. More than I'd ever had at once in my entire life. I felt powerful. In secret. In silence. But powerful. And then Isla called. My cousin, whom I hadn't seen in years, called because she'd thought of me. Because she knew I wasn't happy where I was. Because mothers talk. And even though I'd never told her anything directly, she knew. Women always know. She told me about the house. She sent me photographs. And when I saw those images, something inside me said, "That is your house. That is your place. That is where you will be reborn." I didn't think twice. Well, I thought about it 1,000 times, but every time I thought about it, the answer was the same. Yes, I want that house. I want that life. I want that space that is mine. I spoke with Isla. We negotiated. The owner wanted $60,000. I had $42,000. I was missing $18,000. It seemed impossible. But I'd done the impossible so many times in my life that I knew I could do it again. I sold more things. Everything I had of value. An antique watch given to me by a lady I'd worked for years ago. A silver bracelet. A wooden chest of drawers I'd inherited from my aunt. I sold everything without looking back. Without regret. In 2 months, I reached $60,000. I called Isla. I told her I was ready. She spoke with the owner. We signed papers, all online, all in secret, all while I was still living in that house where no one truly saw me. Marcus never asked what I was doing at night. He never asked why I spent so much time in my room. He never asked anything, because to him I wasn't doing anything interesting. I just existed. I just filled space. And while he was thinking that, I was purchasing my freedom, signing documents, transferring money, planning my escape. The keys arrived in the mail a week ago. I picked them up myself at the post office. I hid them in my purse. I touched them every night before sleeping, just to remind myself they were real, that it wasn't a dream, that I would soon be far away from there. There were difficult days. Days when I thought maybe I was being selfish. That maybe I should try to talk to Marcus, explain how I felt, give him a chance to change. But then I remembered. I remembered the way he looked at me. I remembered Chloe's comments. I remembered the times they talked about me as if I weren't there. I remembered that I was no longer his mother. I was his burden. And burdens aren't listened to. They're only tolerated until you can get rid of them. I was going to get rid of them first. Not with violence. Not with shouting. But with the most powerful decision a woman can make, the decision to leave. I got off the bus, walked to the small coffee shop at the station, and ordered a coffee and a sandwich. I sat at a table by the window. I ate slowly, watching people pass. Families. Couples. People alone like me. All with their own stories, their own pains, their own decisions. I took out my phone and turned it on. More messages. This time one from Aunt Vivian that said, "Eleanor, please answer. Marcus is worried. We're all worried. This isn't right. You're his mother. You can't just leave like this." I read the message 3 times, and each time I grew angrier. Because no one was worried when they seated me at the end of the table. No one was worried when they treated me like I was invisible. No one was worried when I cried in silence all those nights in the back room. They were only worried now because I had left. Because I'd taken control. Because I'd stopped being the submissive mother who accepted everything without saying a word. I didn't reply. I turned off the phone again. I finished my coffee. I returned to the bus. The journey continued. Hours and hours of highway, of changing landscapes, of small towns appearing and disappearing outside the window. And I sat there, feeling how every mile separated me from my past and brought me closer to my future. For the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something good for myself.